My husband finally cut ties with his toxic mom and sister after they demanded we give up our house for my jobless sister-in-law and her family. Alright, so let me just start by saying my husband Brian was always the golden child. You know, the one the family practically revolves around? His mom Karen treated him like he was the sun, moon, and stars. Growing up, they were super close because his dad was always working, and that left Brian with his mom all the time. Their bond was really tight, and honestly, it was a little too close for comfort when I first saw it. I didn't think too much of it at first, though. I mean, it's normal for moms and sons to be close, right? But as I spent more time with them, it became clear that Karen didn't just favor Brian. She worshipped him. Meanwhile, his sister Amanda always got the short end of the stick. Karen barely paid attention to Amanda, and I could tell that growing up in Brian's shadow left Amanda feeling pretty bitter. Still, Brian tried to be a good big brother to her. He's got a good heart like that. Anyway, when Brian and I started dating, it wasn't long before things got weird with Karen and Amanda. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then things started happening that made me realize I wasn't imagining it. For example, Brian and I were living together at the time, and his family would drop by unannounced all the time. Now, I've got no problem with family visits, but at least give us a heads up, you know? Apparently, that wasn't their style. One morning, I was dead asleep in bed with Brian, and all of a sudden, Amanda just bursts into the room like it's totally normal. No knock, no nothing, just barges right in. I'm there, lying in bed half naked, and she starts chatting with Brian like it's no big deal. I don't even know if she noticed or cared that I was in my underwear. I was mortified, but she acted like this was completely normal behavior. Who does that? At first, I thought maybe this was some weird sibling thing, and that I just didn't get it. But after it happened a few more times, I was like, okay, enough is enough. I pulled Brian aside and told him that I wasn't comfortable with his sister just waltzing into our bedroom whenever she felt like it. I mean, come on, it's basic courtesy to knock, right? I shouldn't have to explain that to someone who's a grown adult. Brian agreed with me, so we decided to put a lock on the door to stop Amanda from barging in. Now, you'd think that would solve the problem, but nope. The very next morning, Amanda tried to come in again, and when she couldn't get in, she absolutely lost it. She was jiggling the door handle, pounding on the door, and yelling for Brian to let her in. I was lying there like, what in the actual hell is happening right now? Brian, being the kind soul that he is, finally opened the door to talk to her, and she immediately starts demanding to know why the door was locked. Before Brian could even get a word out, she's pointing at me and calling me a skank. I kid you not. She was furious, saying I was the reason he locked the door and that I was trying to come between them. I was just sitting there, stunned. Like, where the hell did that even come from? Who goes straight to calling someone a skank just because they want privacy in their own room? Brian tried to calm her down, but Amanda wasn't having it. She kept saying how siblings shouldn't have secrets from each other, and how the lock was unnecessary. Brian told her that it wasn't about keeping secrets, it was just about privacy, especially when we're, sleeping. But she wouldn't listen. She was convinced that I was the problem, that I was driving a wedge between them, and she wasn't shy about telling me so. After that, things were never the same with Amanda. She had it out for me, and I could feel it every time we were in the same room. If Brian and I disagreed on something, even something as dumb as what movie to watch, Amanda would take his side and tell him that he needed someone who understood him better. Like, she'd say that right in front of me. It was so uncomfortable. And then there were the questions. Oh my God, the questions. When Brian wasn't around, Amanda would grill me about my past relationships, making all these snide remarks. She'd say stuff like, "Why did your ex dump you? And I bet he thought you weren't good enough for him, huh?" It was so passive-aggressive. She even went as far as to say, "Brian's last girlfriend was way prettier than you." Like, who says that? At first, I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to cause more drama with Brian's family, and I figured maybe she'd stop if I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. But the more she poked and prodded, the harder it became to stay quiet. One day, she asked me, again, why my last relationship ended, and I just snapped. I told her, well, I liked my ex's family a lot more than Brian's because they didn't have a nosy sister who constantly tried to stir up trouble. That shut her up for a while. I'm not the kind of person who likes confrontation, but man, it felt good to put her in her place for once. But honestly, as much as Amanda annoyed me, Karen was no better. When I first started dating Brian, she acted like I didn't exist. She wouldn't even look in my direction at family dinners or gatherings. I'd try to make small talk, and she'd just completely ignore me. It was awkward as hell, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get through to her. Then, when Karen realized that Brian and I were serious about each other, things took a turn. Instead of ignoring me, she started treating me like I was some kind of threat. I could tell she didn't like the idea of her son being with someone else. She made snide comments about how I must have had it easy because my parents sent me to a private school, and she acted like I was some spoiled brat just because of that. At one point, Karen even told Brian that I wasn't wife material and that he could do better. Like, excuse me? What century are we living in? Thankfully, Brian didn't listen to her. He proposed to me anyway, and that's when the real drama started. Karen and Amanda completely lost it when they found out we were getting married. They both called me, separately, and told me to give the ring back. They literally tried to talk me out of marrying him. I don't know if they thought they could bully me into breaking up with him, but they were dead wrong. I wasn't about to let them control my life. So yeah, that's when I started seeing just how toxic things were with Brian's family. And honestly, it was only the beginning. So, after Brian proposed, things really started to go downhill with his family. Like, I already knew they didn't exactly love me, but I didn't expect them to react like that. You'd think a normal family would be happy when their son gets engaged, right? Nope. Not with Karen and Amanda. They acted like I had personally declared war on their family or something. The day after we announced the engagement, Karen called me. At first, I thought maybe she was going to congratulate me, try to play nice or something. But nope, she went right into it. She told me straight up that she didn't think I was good enough for her son and that I should give the ring back to Brian. She said it so casually, like she was telling me to return a sweater that didn't fit. I just sat there, stunned for a second, trying to wrap my head around the fact that she was asking me to call off the engagement. Then she really started to pile it on. She said that Brian deserved someone who came from a better family, whatever that means, and that I wouldn't be able to take care of him the way she had. I could practically hear the jealousy in her voice. It was like she couldn't stand the idea that someone else might take care of Brian. And honestly, that just creeped me out. I tried to stay calm and told her that I loved Brian and we were getting married whether she liked it or not. She wasn't happy about that answer, obviously. She started going on and on about how I was ruining their family and how Brian wouldn't have proposed if I hadn't manipulated him. Seriously, the things she was saying were nuts. It felt like she'd convinced herself that I had somehow tricked her son into proposing. Like, what kind of mother thinks that about their own child? It was pretty clear that nothing I said was going to change her mind, so I ended the call. But honestly, I felt awful afterward. I didn't want Brian to feel like he had to choose between me and his family, but Karen was making it really hard for me to see how we were all going to get along after this. Later that day, I told Brian about the call, and he was just as pissed as I was. He didn't understand why his mom couldn't just be happy for us, and he was fed up with the way she treated me. He promised me that he was going to talk to her and set things straight. I appreciated that, but I also knew Karen wasn't the type to listen. Still, Brian gave it a shot. He called her up and tried to have a calm conversation, but from what I could hear, because he was in the other room but Karen's voice is loud, it didn't go well. She was saying all the same stuff she said to me, but this time to Brian's face. She told him I wasn't the right girl for him, that I was after his money. Mind you, Brian and I both work and make about the same amount of money, so that was rich coming from her. And that if he married me, he'd regret it. Brian told her that it was his decision and that he loved me, but she wasn't backing down. Eventually, he just hung up, and we both sat there in silence for a while. I could tell he was hurt. I mean, no one wants to hear their mom tear down the person they love. It put this weird tension between us because, while I knew Brian was on my side, I also knew how much he loved his family. And I didn't want to be the reason that his relationship with them got destroyed. It was just a mess. But the drama didn't stop there, because Amanda decided to get involved too. A few days after Brian's call with Karen, Amanda called me out of the blue. I had no idea what she wanted, but I figured she might be calling to smooth things over or something. She told me that she agreed with everything her mom said and that I needed to give the ring back. Like, she straight up said, "You're not good enough for my brother, and if you really cared about him, you'd let him go." I mean, who even says stuff like that? She kept going, telling me that Brian deserved to marry someone with class, and how he was making the biggest mistake of his life by choosing me. At that point, I had enough. I told her that it wasn't her decision to make, and if she didn't like it, that was her problem. I don't know why, but she seemed shocked that I stood up to her. Maybe she thought I was just going to sit there and take it, but nope. I wasn't about to let her talk to me like that, especially when I knew Brian and I were solid. When I told Brian about the call, he was even more pissed than before. This time, he went straight over to his parents' house to talk to both Karen and Amanda in person. I didn't go with him because, honestly, I didn't want to be in the middle of that train wreck. When he got back, he told me that it was just more of the same. They both doubled down on their belief that I wasn't the right person for him, and Karen even tried to guilt trip him by saying she just wanted the best for him, but Brian wasn't having it. He told them both that he was marrying me whether they liked it or not, and if they couldn't accept that, they didn't have to come to the wedding. I think that's when they finally realized how serious he was because they started backpedaling a little. Karen even tried to say she was just looking out for him and didn't mean any harm. Sure, okay. In the end, they sort of backed off, but I knew it wasn't over. Karen started being all passive-aggressive whenever we saw her, making little comments about how marriage was such a big responsibility and how I needed to take care of Brian like she had. She was constantly reminding me of how much she had done for him growing up, like I owed her something. And Amanda, well, she just kept calling me a gold digger behind my back. Real mature. Things came to a head when Karen insisted on planning our rehearsal dinner. At first, I didn't want to let her, but Brian thought it might be a good way for her to feel included, so I gave in. I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that this wasn't going to end well. I should have just trusted my gut and said no, but Brian was hopeful that this would be a good way to get his mom involved without causing any more drama. He thought it would make her feel included, and maybe, just maybe, she'd chill out a bit if we gave her some control over something. I went along with it thinking, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I was about to find out. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be this intimate, laid-back evening before the wedding, just our close family and the bridal party. Nothing fancy, just good food, some laughs, and maybe a few heartfelt speeches. I wasn't expecting a Michelin star meal or anything, but I thought it'd be decent, especially since Karen insisted on handling everything herself. She even turned down our offer to help pay for the dinner, saying she had it all under control. We showed up to the venue, and right away, I could tell something was off. The first thing I saw when we walked in was these cheap plastic tablecloths thrown over picnic tables. I'm not talking about cute outdoor picnic tables either. Just the kind you'd see in a park or a public barbecue area. It looked like a rushed setup, and I was already starting to feel embarrassed. I glanced over at Brian, and he had this confused look on his face like, what is this? But it got worse. When we sat down, we realized the food wasn't even catered or homemade. Nope, it was a mix of fast food takeout. Cold tacos, soggy burritos, and some half-warm nachos were laid out like a sad buffet. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's not like we were expecting a 5-star meal, but this? For a rehearsal dinner? It felt like Karen just didn't care at all. She had weeks to plan this, and this is what she came up with? I was honestly trying to keep it together, not wanting to cause a scene, but then Karen walked in, all smiles, acting like everything was perfectly fine. She started telling everyone how much work she'd put into the dinner, and I just sat there, biting my tongue. I didn't want to ruin the night before our wedding, so I kept quiet, but man, I was fuming inside. Brian's dad, Mike, showed up a little late, and when he saw what was going on, he looked just as confused as the rest of us. He quietly sat down and tried to make the best of it, but I could tell he was irritated. Karen, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice that everyone was uncomfortable. She kept making little speeches about how hard she worked to make this night special, and I was just sitting there thinking, are you serious right now? Then, Karen started drinking. A lot. The more she drank, the louder she got. She started going on and on about how stressful it was for her that Brian was getting married. She kept saying things like, I can't wait for this to be over. And this wedding has been so hard on me. It was all about her, like she was the one getting married. It was so awkward, and people were starting to whisper and exchange looks. I could feel my face turning red from embarrassment. At one point, she got up, almost knocking over a plate of cold nachos, and started thanking everyone for coming, like she was hosting some grand event. Then, out of nowhere, she started crying, like full-on sobbing. She started talking about how she was losing her son and how she hoped I would take care of him since she wouldn't be able to anymore. I just sat there in shock. Brian was trying to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop. It was like a complete meltdown. Mike finally had enough. He got up, walked over to Karen, and gently told her it was time to leave. Karen, still sobbing, tried to argue, but Mike wasn't having it. He practically had to drag her out of there, with her stumbling and crying the whole way. It was a disaster, and the whole room was dead silent after they left. I couldn't believe that this was how our rehearsal dinner turned out. Brian and I were just sitting there, both of us completely embarrassed. The rest of the guests tried to carry on like nothing happened, but the mood was ruined. Amanda wasn't much help either. She tried to defend Karen, saying she was just emotional because her baby boy was getting married. But I wasn't buying it. This wasn't just Karen being emotional. This was Karen making everything about herself again, and trying to turn our wedding into her drama fest. After the dinner was over, Brian and I went home, and I told him straight up that I was worried about what his mom and sister were going to do at the wedding. If they could turn a simple rehearsal dinner into a disaster, What were they going to pull on the actual wedding day? Brian tried to reassure me, saying his dad would keep them in line, but I wasn't so sure. I mean, I appreciated him trying to stay positive, but after what happened that night, I wasn't willing to take any chances. I was also frustrated that Brian wasn't seeing how big of a problem his family had become. He kept brushing it off like it was just one bad night, but I knew this was bigger than that. Karen and Amanda had been sabotaging things from the start, and now I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop at the wedding. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, and all I could think about was how Karen and Amanda were going to ruin our big day. I didn't want to sound like a bridezilla, but I didn't want my wedding to be a circus either. I kept going over every possible scenario in my head, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. It wasn't just about me either. I knew Brian would be devastated if his family made a scene at the wedding, and I didn't want that for him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. I didn't know what, but I just knew. In the end, the rehearsal dinner was a mess, but it gave me a wake-up call. Karen and Amanda weren't going to back down, and I needed to figure out how to protect our wedding day from becoming another one of their dramatic episodes. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but I had no idea what was coming next. I had my guard up, but it wasn't enough to prepare me for what was about to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't just sit back and let us have a peaceful day, not after how the rehearsal dinner went. I mean, if they could ruin something as simple as that, what were they going to do at the actual wedding? The night before the wedding, Brian and I had our first real fight. We'd been through some rough patches dealing with his family, but we'd always been on the same page, supporting each other. But this time, I had reached my breaking point. I told him straight up that I didn't want his mom or sister at the wedding. I knew it sounded extreme, but after all the stunts they'd pulled, I wasn't willing to take the risk. I didn't want our big day to turn into a circus because Karen couldn't handle not being the center of attention, or because Amanda wanted to play protective sister again. Brian, though? He wasn't having it. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea of not having his family at the wedding, even after everything they'd done. He kept saying, "They're my family, they won't ruin it," and "Dad will make sure they behave." But I wasn't convinced. I told him that if they were there, it wasn't just our wedding anymore. It was going to be another opportunity for Karen and Amanda to make it all about them. The conversation went in circles for a while. He kept defending them, trying to downplay how bad it had gotten, but I wasn't budging. I knew deep down that Karen and Amanda couldn't be trusted, and I didn't want to look back on my wedding day with regret, because I let them get away with more nonsense. Finally, I just laid it all out there. I told him that if they came to the wedding, there wouldn't be a wedding. I know that sounds dramatic, but at that point, I was exhausted. I couldn't deal with them anymore. Brian looked at me like I had just slapped him across the face. He was hurt, and I could see it. I felt awful, but I also knew that I wasn't going to spend my wedding day walking on eggshells, waiting for Karen to pull some stunt, or for Amanda to start another fight. I had to make him understand how serious I was about this. It took a while for him to process what I was saying. I could see him struggling, torn between me and his family, and honestly, I didn't envy him. I know how close he is to his dad, Mike, and I knew this was killing him. But at the end of the day, I was his wife-to-be, and I needed him to prioritize us over the chaos his mom and sister kept bringing into our lives. Eventually, he sighed, and I could tell he'd made up his mind. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed. He called his dad early the next morning and told him that Karen and Amanda were uninvited. Mike wasn't surprised, which didn't shock me at all. I think deep down, even he knew that Karen and Amanda were too much to handle. Mike promised Brian that he'd make sure they wouldn't show up, and honestly, I felt a little relief wash over me. But at the same time, I knew this wasn't going to be the end of it. Sure enough, not long after that call, both Karen and Amanda started blowing up Brian's phone. They were relentless, calling and texting nonstop, trying to guilt-trip him into letting them come to the wedding. I could hear Karen from across the room, accusing me of turning Brian against her and ruining their relationship. She kept going on about how I was a terrible influence, and that Brian was making a huge mistake by cutting them out. Amanda wasn't much better, throwing all kinds of accusations about how I was trying to steal her brother away from their family. It was so predictable, I almost rolled my eyes listening to it. But Brian stayed firm, and honestly, I was so proud of him in that moment. It wasn't easy for him to stand up to his mom and sister like that, but he did it. He told them point blank that they weren't welcome at the wedding because of how they'd treated me and how they'd disrespected our relationship from the start. He didn't leave any room for argument, and for once, they had to accept it. That didn't stop Karen from getting in one last jab before the call ended, though. She went on this whole rant about how she was the real victim here, how she was losing her son because of me, and how I'd manipulated Brian into shutting her out of his life. It was all so dramatic and over the top. But what really pissed me off was when she said, "You'll regret this decision. You'll regret choosing her over your family." That hit a nerve, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't going to let her drag me down into her drama. When the calls finally stopped, Brian and I just sat there in silence for a bit, processing everything. I could tell he was struggling with what had just happened, and I felt bad for putting him in that position, but I also knew it was the right call. This was our day, and we deserved to enjoy it without any more chaos from his family. The wedding day itself was beautiful, though. Everything went off without a hitch. I was nervous the entire morning, half expecting Karen or Amanda to show up and make a scene, but they didn't. Mike came, just like he promised, and he was so supportive. It was clear that he didn't agree with how Karen and Amanda had been acting, and he made a point to tell both Brian and me how happy he was for us. That meant a lot to me, especially after all the drama. We had a perfect ceremony, surrounded by the people who actually cared about us and wanted to celebrate our happiness. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. There were no interruptions, no passive-aggressive comments, no meltdowns, just love, laughter, and a lot of relief. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. As for Karen and Amanda, well, they didn't show up, thankfully. But I found out later that they had planned to. A few of Brian's cousins told me after the wedding that Karen and Amanda had been planning to wear white to the ceremony to make a statement. Yeah, you read that right. They wanted to upstage me at my own wedding. It was one of those moments where I was like, thank God I trusted my instincts. If we hadn't uninvited them, who knows what kind of chaos they would have caused. By the end of the night, I was just grateful. Grateful that Brian stood up for me. Grateful that we had such a beautiful day. And grateful that I wouldn't have to deal with Karen and Amanda's nonsense for at least a little while. I knew the drama with them wasn't over for good, but for that day, it was perfect. A couple of years went by, and things seemed to calm down. Brian and I had worked hard, saved up, and finally bought our first house. It was a huge deal for us, something we'd been working toward for years. When we got the keys, it felt like such a big accomplishment, like we had finally built something that was just ours. We had a small housewarming party with close friends and a few family members, but I didn't invite Karen or Amanda. After everything that went down at the wedding, I wasn't in any rush to deal with them again. Of course, they found out about the house eventually. A few weeks later, Karen and Amanda dropped by to see the place, though I made sure I wasn't around for most of it. Brian showed them the house and told me later that the visit had been awkward, but brief. I thought that would be the end of it, and maybe we'd keep our distance for good. But nope. I should have known better. One afternoon, out of nowhere, Karen called me. It was honestly weird because we hadn't spoken since the wedding. The moment I saw her name pop up on my phone, I had this bad feeling in my gut. I hesitated for a second, but figured I'd better answer it just to see what she wanted. At first, she tried to play nice. She asked how I was doing and made some small talk, asking how Brian and I were liking the new house. But I could tell something was off. She was way too friendly, and it just didn't feel genuine. And then she dropped it. Out of nowhere, she told me that Amanda was pregnant again, her 6th child, and that because Amanda's family was struggling financially, Brian and I should give up our house to them. At first, I didn't even know how to respond. I just sat there, speechless, trying to figure out if she was joking or if I'd misheard her. So I asked her, "Are you serious?" And Karen, without missing a beat, said yes. She was dead serious. She went on to explain how Amanda's house was too small for her growing family, and how it only made sense for us to give up our home since it was too big for just Brian and me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her why on earth she thought we should just hand over our house, and that's when she said the kicker. She claimed that Brian had already agreed to it. That set me off. I knew that was a lie. Brian and I had always made decisions together, and there was no way he would have promised something like that without talking to me first. I felt my blood start to boil. I told her flat out that this was our home, the one we had worked hard to buy, and there was no way we were giving it up to anyone. I made it crystal clear that Brian and I made decisions as a team, and he would never agree to something like that without discussing it with me. Karen, of course, wasn't having any of it. She started yelling at me, saying it was my duty, as a daughter-in-law to make room for Amanda and her kids. Like what? Since when is it my job to solve Amanda's financial problems? At that point, I was done with her nonsense. I told her sarcastically that if she felt so strongly about helping Amanda, then she could go ahead and pay the mortgage for us. I mean, if Amanda and her family were going to live here, someone had to cover the bills, right? Karen didn't like that at all. She blew up, yelling about how that wasn't her responsibility and how I was being selfish and unreasonable. But honestly, the audacity of the whole thing just blew my mind. I couldn't believe she thought she could bulldoze over us like that and just demand we give up our house. After she finished her rant, I calmly told her that this conversation was over and hung up. When Brian got home that evening, I immediately told him what had happened. He was furious. He hadn't heard a thing about any of this and confirmed exactly what I already knew. There was no way in hell he would ever agree to give up our house, especially without talking to me first. He called his mom right away, and I could hear the frustration in his voice as he told her off. Karen tried to backpedal, but Brian wasn't having it. He told her that Amanda's problems were not our responsibility and that we weren't giving up our home for anyone, end of story. After that call, things between Brian and his mom were even more strained. But honestly, I didn't care. There was no way I was letting anyone guilt me into giving up something we had worked so hard for. It just showed, once again, how entitled Karen and Amanda were. They acted like Brian and I existed solely to fix their problems, and I was done playing that game. From that moment on, I knew we had to set some serious boundaries. If Karen and Amanda were going to keep pulling stunts like this, they needed to understand that there were consequences. And if that meant cutting them off again, so be it. About a week later, Karen and Amanda decided to take things to the next level. I guess they thought showing up at our house unannounced would somehow change Brian's mind. They came banging on the door, demanding to be let in, like they were entitled to invade our space whenever they felt like it. I could hear Karen shouting from the other side of the door, calling me all sorts of names, and Amanda wasn't far behind, accusing me of stealing Brian from their family. But I wasn't having it. I didn't open the door. I told them through the door that they needed to leave and that this was our home, not theirs. The fact that they thought they could just force their way back into our lives was unbelievable. They kept banging, yelling, and causing a scene, but I refused to engage with them any further. Brian got home not long after, and when he saw what was happening, he was furious. He didn't hesitate for a second. He walked right up to the door and told them flat out that if they ever showed up at our house like this again, we'd call the cops. I think they were shocked by how firm he was because they finally left after that, but not before throwing a few last-minute insults my way. Since that day, we've had zero contact with Karen and Amanda. And honestly, I don't miss it at all. It's like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Brian and I can actually focus on our life together without the constant interference from his toxic family. No more passive-aggressive texts, no more guilt-tripping, no more drama. Just peace. It hasn't been easy for Brian, though. I know he still loves his mom and sister, despite everything, but he's realized that loving them doesn't mean he has to let them walk all over us. Setting those boundaries has made our relationship stronger, and it's given us the space we needed to breathe and build our own life together. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship with Karen and Amanda again, but for now, I'm just thankful that Brian and I are finally free from the chaos they brought into our lives. And honestly, it feels like we've finally taken control of our own story, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.